Matthew Reynolds, what is your favourite game?
My favourite game is Shenmue. It's really like a terrible cliche to say like, oh, I've always been playing games since I was little or whatever, but it's kind of true. I don't remember a time when I didn't have like games in my life. The first games console I had was an Amiga 500. I say me, it was actually my sister's, and I think my dad bought it for her as kind of like a kind of educational kind of computer. But we ended up just playing games on it all the time. So I remember actually having quite a fond childhood, just playing tons of games on that. We had like kind of these disc trays full of floppy disks, because if no one not quite sure what an Amiga is, it's basically kind of like a kind of computer style kind of console, and you put floppy disks in it, and some games would require like tons of floppy disks, and it wasn't kind of like the Amstrad where you put in a tape and you have to wait 20 minutes, but you'd have to kind of flick in and out floppy disks. I remember like this desk full of floppy disks everywhere, and tons of different games like demos and kind of like demo scene stuff and like full retail games, and I just remember just really kind of happy early childhood just playing games. That's what I did in my free time, which was pretty cool. So there wasn't ever a time where games weren't a thing, and I always used to remember reading loads of games magazines as well since I was little as well, like The One and a bunch of Amiga magazines, and kind of pestering my mum in supermarkets and newsagents for like the latest issue of whatever Amiga magazine with the floppy disks on the front cover. So that's kind of how, in my very early years, I started sort of playing games, really.
Like, what games were you playing back then on the Amiga?
I think the games I was really into, Lemmings was a really, really big one, which is obviously a classic that's been on like a bunch of different platforms. Rainbow Islands and Bubble Bobble were two big ones, again, kind of like arcade games, but the Amiga, what was so great about it was like a 16-bit console that could like have really great arcade perfect ports on them. So these were like kind of really definitive versions of these games. And a bunch of like just a lot of platformers. I think I was really into platformers as a kid. I remember games like Super Frog and Fire and Ice. A lot of kind of like that weird, almost kind of like psychedelic coloured platformers. Like Fire and Ice had like these really cool like backgrounds that used to kind of have a cool like scale of like vibrant colours. And I think there's a Trolls game we used to play. Like, do you remember the Trolls that you stick on a pencil? There's like a platform with that, and it's like really kind of vibrant colours, and it's really kind of weird like games that you don't really see today that had a very particular kind of like pixel art style and kind of like a colour scheme, and stuff that you don't really see a lot now. You see more actually with indie games today, and you see a lot of developers saying like, oh, back then the kind of the developer scene of like making homebrew games is kind of similar to what they're doing now, and I could kind of relate to that quite a lot recently, because I kind of grew up with Amiga games like that, which was kind of interesting. And then there's all sorts of other games where like there's like random flight sims where I was just way too young to really understand, but I tried to play them, and like pinball games and racing games, like really all sorts. But Lemmings I think was one that I was utterly obsessed with in particular.
What about further down the line then?
I think from there I basically got into consoles quite heavily. I don't know how I first learned about like Sega stuff, like a Master System and Mega Drive, but I think what it was I must have got like a VHS tape of like Sonic the Hedgehog or like some sort of Sega preview, which incidentally is actually the same way I learned about the SNES. There's like a video with like Craig Charles from Red Dwarf, kind of like showing off like random Nintendo games on this weird kind of spaceship set, and that's how the first time I learned of a SNES. So obviously that's a very kind of early 90s way of learning about video games. Because I think all the magazines I bought then were very platform specific, so I just learned about this platform. So I somehow found about Sonic, and like Lemmings, I was just utterly obsessed with Sonic, like really obsessed. Used to play all the games all the time. I used to like collect all the memorabilia. I used to have like Sonic the Hedgehog toothpaste.
What?
Yeah, and I don't think I actually used it because I was like, no, this is like I don't want to touch this. I had Sonic the Hedgehog slippers. The reason that I got into tomato ketchup because I got some Daddy's tomato ketchup that's branded with Sonic. And my dad quite cleverly like played not a trick, but it's like a way to get you to like tomato ketchup is to get a Sonic branded tomato ketchup, and lo and behold, it worked. I quite liked tomato ketchup from then on in. So I was really obsessed with Sonic. So absolutely loved the Sonic games as a kid. And from there, really, I don't know, I just kept up with all the consoles. Like, I got a SNES, I had a NES in my house. Went into like PlayStation. Like, PlayStation was a big thing. Like playing games like Final Fantasy 7, Metal Gear Solid. Looking back, it's really weird because it's like you don't realize how fortunate you are as a kid, like to have grown up in this age where games were changing so much and advancing, like adding story and cinematic gameplay and like 3D worlds, and you just kind of take it all for granted, I think. But it's just, yeah, and I was really fortunate to have parents who kind of like supported my hobby, and you know, it kind of like got me like most of the consoles I had. They weren't like terribly well off, but like we didn't have like a lot of pocket money, for example, but they made sure like at Christmas or birthdays, like they'd treat us, which was really great of them. So yeah, I owe it to them to kind of like, you know, the amount of consoles and games I had was because they kind of realised how much I loved games and wanted to make sure, you know, I was kind of happy and that sort of stuff. And then as a teenager, then obviously I had part-time jobs, and I bought a lot of consoles second-hand, and like I bought a Dreamcast and a Saturn and stuff, and like friends had consoles as well, so I was going around there and learning about them and things like that. So that's kind of that side of things. And then as I was going into my kind of like mid-teens, I started to get into FAQ writing and walkthroughs on game FAQs, and that's kind of like became like very much like a hobby to like kind of like to like a bit of a I don't know how you describe it, like kind of like a pastime of like writing walkthroughs and applying what I knew about games and what I kind of learned and all those hours playing them into something practical that I could actually post online and help people with. And I really enjoyed that, and I posted up like over 50 FAQs and got into like the game FAQs community, and it was really, I don't know, it's something I really enjoyed doing.
The revelation from that was that there was actually Sonic the Hedgehog toothpaste. That's what was so revelatory to me.
Yeah, definitely. Like you think like today you see like Angry Birds stuff and like Mario. I think Mario to a lesser degree, but definitely Angry Birds stuff. Like that was
Angry
like,
Birds.
Sonic was huge. Sonic was big. So I know I was utterly obsessed. So yeah, it was very strange. And yeah, I think post Dreamcast era, as the game's quality decreased, my interest decreased as well.
How about the industry side of things? How did you get on that side of things?
I went to university, I did geography, and geography just wasn't a thing I was interested in. I think I learned like at the start of my second year going back to university, I thought, oh god, this is just, I don't know. I was good at geography. I quite enjoyed it, but I just didn't think as like a job to do. I didn't know what to do, and I just really struggled for quite some time. And then I joined the student newspaper as kind of like just as extracurricular stuff to do. And I basically wound up on the games section and the games and tech section. What happened? I joined the games team, and so the editor at the time was, I think he'd been doing it for a while, and it's just like, does someone want to pick it up? And I grabbed it with both hands. I was like, yeah, I'll take that. So that was quite influential, but more so than anything, he kind of recommended to us that we listen to a podcast called One Up Yours. And I remember like just listening to that, and it was crazy. Like suddenly my world opened up in terms of what you could, like how you could talk and think about games. Like it was strange. Up until then, I only read like magazines, and obviously the web was a thing, and you know, I was really into kind of like games criticism and games discussion through that way. But to listen to it on a podcast and people talk about it was just something completely different. And YouTube really wasn't a thing. And then you had like the One Up Show, which is that kind of like video-based show, and the ways those guys talked about games, and it was just like,
I remember the One Up Show, yeah.
And it's like the most incredible video game show ever made. And like the podcast I just would listen to religiously, and it was just like, wow, people would talk about games in such a way that I'd never even thought about before. And it just also made me realise that not only like could games discussion really be interesting in that way, but also this was like a job that people had. Like it's strange that as a kid, like you read magazines and you just like CVG was quite good. Like as a magazine, I really read a lot, and you had like they were quite personality driven. Like you had like the fun little bios at the front, and you kind of sense that these are people writing this. But I don't know, it's just never a job that I thought I could have. Like it was not a job that I thought was in my reach. So until I listened to like the One Up Show and stuff like that, just set me in a course of like I would like to try and do this game journalism thing if I can. I really love games. I like writing about games, and you know it'd be great to actually to do this. So basically that's how that kind of happened. So after university, I basically started applying for various places, and thankfully Digital Spy, the site I currently work at now, was advertising for a part-time games reporter. So after like 3 months of leaving university, I was working with them on a part-time basis, and basically it was just kind of like doing more game stuff with them, and kind of like I was basically working my way up in the website. So I was doing various bits and bobs, like I was doing production stuff in the evenings, like working on images and video. I did some Big Brother reporting, which was quite fun.
Oh, I'm sure.
It's kind of almost like a rite of passage, because Big Brother was like the bread and butter of Digital Spy for a good number of years. So I was doing like night shifts, reporting on like the kind of overnight blog of like just like reporting on what people were doing as they were asleep. So you could just, this person is turning over in their sleep, and this guy like Samantha snored or whatever. I don't know. It was quite like mind-numbing, but at the same time, when it was actually stuff was kicking off, it was good live blog practice when I obviously had to cover things like E3. So I was doing that stuff on the side and like getting experience in kind of journalism in various aspects, and I basically just kept asking to do more stuff in gaming, and I think I ended up badgering the editor so much that he just kind of like gave in and just said like, yeah, do you want to just run the game section? Do you want to do that? That was about like 4 years ago or so, and I've been doing it ever since.
Let's get into it then. Your favourite game, Shenmue. So before Shenmue, were there any Suzuki games that you played before? And obviously there was Virtua Fighter as well.
Yeah, there was. No, I didn't play any of his games before then. I just wasn't even kind of aware that he was a thing, really. Like, I was aware of like Virtua Fighter and the work he did there, but no, Shenmue was my first game that I played of his.
So you weren't really aware of the concept of auteurs in gaming, basically, like among the likes of, say, like you weren't aware of people like Suzuki, or even to an extent people like Miyamoto, Kojima, etc.
I think Miyamoto, yes. Kojima, yes. I think Kojima, like, because I loved Metal Gear Solid, and I think Metal Gear Solid 2 was maybe after Shenmue, or at least when I played it. I'm not sure, but yeah, I certainly knew of the idea of that sort of thing. But it's definitely like after that, post that, I was like, okay, this is this kind of thing. And actually, like, Shenmue does a really good job at kind of like narrowing in on what Yu Suzuki is all about, because there's various parts of the game, and we'll discuss it in a sec, like that kind of go into his various history of the games he's done and what he likes to do, and that's kind of like it's a very good game that kind of encapsulates what he's about and what he likes to make.
So the evolution of Shenmue, like it first started out as a Virtua Fighter RPG spin-off on the Sega Saturn. So it did.
Yes, it did. Yeah, it had like a kind of a weird like history of like kind of becoming a role-playing game on a Virtua Fighter kind of take on that, and it used to be on the Saturn, and you can see videos online of like this is a game that's actually quite similar to what the final thing came out to be. Obviously, the visual quality is a bit different, but you could tell kind of the ambition, the same kind of ambition and attention to detail is there, which is really interesting. So that's kind of neat.
Like obviously a big aspect of Shenmue was, of course, Rio, but like if it had continued its I can never pronounce this word. Trajectory. There we go.
Yeah.
Got there in the end. If it had kept on that path, it would have had Akira as the main character. So it would have been interesting to see how that would have turned out if it ever did. Basically. I
think so. It's especially since like the end of the second game ends on such a cliffhanger and goes in such a really interesting direction. It's a bit of a shame that you never got to see what was next. But yeah, it's the whole thing is just the whole Shenmue saga is crazy ambitious. I mean, it's something like, I can't remember the exact number of chapters, but it's something like there's 16 chapters or 12, 13, 16 chapters, something like that tell like different parts of Ryo's story. And the first Shenmue game, I think, looks at just one of these chapters, and then Shenmue 2 looks at like three of them, or three or four combined. It actually skips one where it's like on the boat between the second and third game. The first and second games, there's a boat section where they chop that out, probably wisely, because they thought, right, this is getting too grandiose and large in scale. We need to actually chop and change this. But yeah, there's so much of that they just never got around to. And one of the most fascinating things I went to recently, I went to GDC last year in 2014, and Yu Suzuki did like a post-mortem on Shenmue. And he kind of discussed in like very vague terms of where he would have liked to have gone, and basically like it's a very kind of like simple story, and I think Shenmue generally has a very simple story to tell. There's nothing actually too kind of ambitious in the way it does storytelling and characters. But it's basically, yeah, he ends up kind of catching up with Landy, defeating Landy, avenging his father. And I'm sure it's probably a bit more nuanced than that in kind of like little particular details. But yeah, I think he just had this grand scope of like the places he would go and the things he would see as a player. And yeah, I kind of, it would have been amazing to kind of see that realised.
I actually wanted to touch upon the GDC talk a bit later on, so we'll come back to that.
Certainly.
The production side of the game, like we've touched upon its evolution, but when it was actually in full development, Shenmue is one of the most expensive games ever made, and what it did like cost a pretty penny, basically put it like that. 70 million was the initial budget, according to Suzuki. Which is basically, if you adjust it for inflation, is just shy of 100 million this year.
That's crazy.
That's yeah, it is crazy, especially for a game of that era.
For the time, yeah. Like, I mean, I imagine there's games like now that have kind of like budgets like that you know just isn't, because the thing is like the game itself, it's weird. Like I think in part of it, like you have to look at it like this game back then when it was released and kind of how ambitious it was for the time. Like you look at it now and it's like, well, the areas that it has, because it's kind of like an open world game where you kind of go do what you want and kind of explore things how you please. And you could make a game today like of a similar scale and size, and it probably wouldn't be that impressive. But at the same time, it's still so handcrafted and so like well put together that even if you tried to make something like this today, I think it'd still be quite expensive. So God knows back then when you had probably like, you know, the kind of like you didn't have the same like engines and the kind of sort of like the tools to really kind of manage teams properly and all that sort of thing. You know, it must have been like you can sort of definitely see why this was an expensive game for its time for sure.
You mentioned some of the elements that made Shenmue what it was. So let's touch upon those. The free code, the abbreviation free, full reactive eyes entertainment. Which Suzuki called it. He was basically describing it as that element of the game as, don't quite know how to put it, but Shenmue was basically advertised as basically a non-linear game, basically the first of its kind, basically.
Yeah, essentially, it's a weird kind of like marketing buzz term, but it's essentially like it's this. I think it's. Shenmue's a weird game. Like it's really hard to describe what it is because it's like a game of so many different component parts, and especially it makes it harder to kind of describe to people because like quite a few people haven't played it. Like it's a game that was only released on the Dreamcast and it's not been ported to anything since. Like there's no HD remake, so it's actually quite hard for people to kind of like play it today and understand what it is. But it's basically a game that kind of tries to simulate real life.
Yeah,
and it does this through a different combination of genres. So what the game actually is, in case people don't know, is you are basically trying to. It's kind of like mostly a detective game where you're playing as a kid called Ryu Suzuki, and you're trying to like solve your father's murder, or like you know who murdered your father. Basically, the game opens up. A guy called Landy shows up, has some past history with your father, kills him, steals a mirror. He knocks Ryu Suzuki, our hero, out, and then you wake up a few days later and you've got a few clues and you've got to work out who is this individual and how do you go after him. So the base of the game is you kind of asking kind of neighbours, you're asking people you know. For clues, and you do that by going out into the actual like neighborhood nearby, and you kind of like knock on doors, and you kind of like chat to people, saying like, did you see a black car on that night my father was killed when the snow turned to rain? And now most people will be like, well, no, I don't know what you're on about, and other people will be like, yeah, here's some clues, and you get another clue to the next part, and basically the game just trickles on from there until you basically learn more about kind of local mobsters, and you find out who Landy is, etc., etc. And it's kind of like an open world detective game where you're kind of just asking people. Kind of these various clues that you have, and the three parts of it comes in that there's various different kind of genres in there. So it's kind of like I think like the main adventure is called Quest, as they phrase it. But there's also a fighting game component. So as you're fighting, people obviously don't want you to find out about Landy, and then you have like virtual fighter style fighting scenes, and they're kind of like. I don't know how they compare to Virtual Fighter because I haven't really played that, but I imagine it's quite similar, and it's my least favourite part of the game. It feels just a bit. The fighting mechanics just feel a little bit floaty, a little bit, I don't know, imprecise, and it's got all like the bare bones of a fighting game in terms of like here's a move list, here's combos you can pull off. But it felt like I just basically spammed, and the people I knew who played it just spammed the same moves over and over, and that would do. But they'd usually kind of like take place in the same environments that you'd be exploring, like, but maybe just off into the side, like a car park or something like that. Trying to get the other elements. So there's tons of side activities, which I'm sure we'll touch on in a second. That's what really makes this game really special and interesting. But the game actually, I think it's the first game, or at least the game that certainly popularised the QuickTime event.
Yeah, I did want to touch upon that because that is literally word for word what was said last season by Alan Williamson, who came on to talk about Sonic 3 and Knuckles, but he mentioned Shenmue 2, which we'll touch upon in great detail in a while, and Shenmue was basically the birth of the QuickTime event.
Yeah, certainly, and how they did it then is kind of like a lot more like literally in your face. Like it's very much like a big button in the middle of the screen. It would make this like really like high pitched sounds, like da-da-da-da, if you kind of like get it right or wrong or whatever. But yeah, you just watch these cutscenes, and there'd usually be fighting scenes or chase scenes where you just have to react and like press a button, and they usually kind of like would fork off. So you'd be like chasing down a street, and if you get one wrong, it wouldn't end. It would just like you kind of like trip over a bin, and you keep going, and you kind of goes on, so on and so forth. And they were really, really well done. Like you can sort of see why this captured an industry's attention, and I think they just got it right out of the gate. The way they were just kind of like very obvious what you had to do. Like they're very kind of like, it's just very alarming. It did the thing where some people hate was during when like you're playing a game that has QuickTime events, and you set down a controller thinking it's a cutscene, and then suddenly there's a QTE, and it's like, oh god, I got to scramble for the controller. It did that, but I didn't think it was quite of annoying as games that tried to do that kind of like trick technique since. But no, it's just part of the entertainment. I think part of it was because it was a fighting game. It was like kind of like a kung fu movie in some senses. It kind of like went well with that. Like there was these parts where you are very hands-on fighting, but there's also parts where it's very cinematic, and he's just strolling into a bar and he's just kicking the crap out of everyone, but you're doing it through like QTEs, and it's just doing it in the most stylish, badass way. And it completely works, and you can sort of see again like why this is kind of like a thing that everyone suddenly started doing.
Yeah, QTEs can basically David Cage owes a lot to Yu Suzuki now.
I think a lot of people do. But yeah, I'd be really interested to see like if some sort of remake comes out, what people, and they haven't played Shenmue before, and they play it, what they think of those QTEs. Because I went back to the game fairly recently, and I found them really fun. I find them actually really good. They don't overdo it, and it's very like, it's so in your face that it's just so obvious what you're doing, and it's just, I don't know. I think they're really effectively well done. The kind of the visual audio stimuli to it as well is pretty spot on.
Like not at all do you think those QTEs have kind of dated, because like it has been 15 and a half years since the game came out?
No, I think it's fine, and because I basically played this game fairly recently for what's it called, Extra Life, the kind of the charity kind of marathon, and I played it through one of my friends, Rob Lane, who actually introduced me to the game for the first time, and so we thought it'd be fun to revisit it. And I was really worried that the game as a whole wouldn't hold up, but it really does. Like I think this game does so many like interesting things and has such like really great attention to detail and great like sense of scale that it just still stands up incredibly well. And part of that is the QTEs. There wasn't a part of the game where I thought this is really bad. Like it all worked really well. So that was kind of like a nice thing. It's like, this is like my favorite game, and yes, it's still really good. So I was pleased by that.
You mentioned the other elements of basically the game. Like Shenmue basically simulates real life aspects, as you said, but like some of them, they kind of name off the top of my head. This like includes RealTime Well, the day and night cycle, which basically mimics how it is here in the real world. Same with Weller. Yeah. Just go into that a little bit.
I think what it does with like time and things like that is actually probably one of my favourite things about the game, because at its core everything runs to a schedule. So there's like an in-game clock, and I can't remember how time progresses, like how quickly it progresses. It's probably like a minute to an hour, I think. So a minute in the real world, an hour in the game, or something like that. But basically it means that shops open at a certain time. Everyone in the game has a routine. So like whether it's people like shopkeepers or like people on the street and they walk around, buses will arrive at bus stops at the correct time. There is weather, and you can call up the weather service and say this is kind of the next day. But it also like affects the story, and that's kind of why it's really interesting. So like you can only meet people at a certain time, or if you're investigating something and it's quite late in the evening, and it's like, oh, okay, actually this shop or this person isn't available right now, I need to wait till the next day. And I think it adds like a sense of realism and authenticity that makes it just feel like an actual place. So it adds kind of like that sense of realism, but also it gives you an excuse to actually do other things. So in like most games where like side quest is just like, well, actually I'd rather just get on with the main game, and like, you know, there's a side quest thing there, but you know, I'd rather just crack on with things.
Yeah.
The game kind of like forced you to be like, well, actually I've got time to kill, so I might as well just check out these cool things. So I might as well go to the local car park and practice my moves, or go to the supermarket and just, I don't know, try my luck on the lucky dip, or go to the arcade and play some of Yu Suzuki's old games. And you know, I thought that was like a really like incredibly like well. It just kind of fit in with the whole game. It's like, this is like a person that is got to kill time, and it made you kind of go check out these things. And these things that you do on the side, they're really well done. Like they're all really deep. They all feel really handcrafted. They don't feel at all throwaway. They all kind of feel embedded in this world, and not as side content, as actual things that if you strolled up to them in real life, this is probably how they would perform or act. And I can sort of see like, and Shenmue, you know, is a divisive game. A lot of people don't like Shenmue. And I think this is one of the reasons, is that it is annoying to wait for things. It is annoying to kind of think, actually, I've got to, like, you know, there's the sailors, the sailor quest that I'm trying to, like, finish. Like, this won't be done until 7 o'clock at night. I've got to wait the whole day. And there's no way to skip forward in time. You have to, like, kill that time somehow. I can see why that's quite annoying, but for me, it's very much like, this is a cool excuse to keep exploring this world. This, like, incredibly, you know, it's this place that's got such good attention to detail and just full of life that I can just keep exploring it. Yeah, the weather was great. Like, as you get towards, the game is kind of set towards the end of the year, so as you get towards Christmas, like the weather would get like a lot more snowy, and like very kind of satisfying, like crunch under the foot as you're kind of going over the snow, and like there'll be a Santa Claus in town, and little things like that just made it feel like, again, this is a place. And yeah, just the game. It's probably also worth saying, like, as well as that, you're talking about the ambition and scale and kind of what this game is, like, it looked absolutely gorgeous. And that's one thing that I also, as I went back to play it recently, like, it really holds up visually. Like, it's got such a really great, distinctive visual style, and the way it's stylized, and it's the Dreamcast is like a console that was of a certain resolution that still holds up today. Like, if you play PS1 games, they look like just like Vaseline just smeared on the screen. They look terrible. Yeah. Just the resolution is really low. But the Dreamcast, like, had a resolution that just today just still looks really good, and just Shenmue looks incredible. And I think that's part in due to like the weather, and also due to the day-night cycle, like the way the day would change into night, and then like, you know, the just like the shadows that would appear, like real-time shadows, and just like the music would change, and just the ambience of the game would just dramatically shift throughout the day. And it's just, yeah, it's just like the way it does time like that is really neat. And I think what I also appreciate about the time in Shenmue is that there's no pressure to it. So like, if you miss something, you just wait for the next day. There's not a sense of like, oh god, I've got to. If I don't do this, then I've missed it forever. Like Majora's Mask, I played that again recently on the 3DS, and I think it does some really interesting things like that. Like, it obviously uses side quests really well. You got to be here at a certain time to catch someone getting mugged, and that way that triggers this whole other quest. I think that's really like interesting in the sense that it gives you the opportunity to have like unique side quests, and, you know, motivates players to do things in a certain way. But Shenmue doesn't have that pressure, but it still has the benefits of like atmosphere, and the benefits of like, this is a sensual place. And the game, you know, doesn't really, it doesn't penalise you for taking your time with things. It can actually end. Like, there is actually an end point to the game, but it's something like in like April, and in the game, and it will take you like forever to get there. Like, there's absolutely no reason you should rush this game. So yeah, I think the way it approaches time is really, really something. And I can't think of many games that really approach it in a similar way and make it so effective.
One other big thing that Shenmue introduced was, for the first time, NPCs that could really express themselves, voiced NPCs, in fact. Yeah,
and it's I think it's part of like that kind of attention to detail, where there's this world where everyone you could meet in the street you could talk to, and everyone had like voice acting. And it really it makes sense, because like a big part of the game is like detective work, and how each of these sequences work was like, it's essentially a linear stretch where like, okay, you have to like find out this certain piece of information in order to progress the story, but how you actually get that information, like there's maybe like, I don't know, 5 or 6 people in the world that you can actually get that from. So you basically want to talk to as many people as possible, and then people, as you play the game, you kind of get to know certain people, like, oh, it's the butcher, or there's Tom, the guy dancing outside the hot stall standing the other way. You know, these people kind of have certain like knowledge of certain people or certain gangs or whatever it is, and and you go to like you basically go to them and think like, okay, this person might know about this thing that I know that. Otherwise, you could just go, if you're just stuck, you just chat to people in the street, and someone might just literally be like, oh, okay, yeah, I actually know what you're on about. Go here. And it's just a game that like it felt like there was a lot of like choice in the way you'd get your goal. You're basically chatting to a lot of people at a given time. There's one particularly good quest where it's the I can't remember what the actual specific name of it. I think it's like it's the Three Blades, I think, and basically it's like a barber, I think like a cook, like a chef, and another kind of blade. But basically like that, they're like basically three shops in the town, so they know about this thing that you know about, but it's up to you which one you go to, how you kind of learn about that in the first place, and yeah, it just kind of the way it kind of spider webs out and then back in again. It's a linear story, but the fact that you can get information in so many different ways is what makes it quite an interesting detective game. And a big part of why that all works is that voice acting is like you could go to anyone in the street and they would give you a convincing response. Sometimes it can just literally be like, oh, I have no idea what you're on about, leave me alone. But, you know, especially for the time, it's like, these are the actual people. These aren't just like randoms in the street that just going to ignore me. That these are people that have their own schedules and, you know, personalities, and can talk to me if I actually approach them. And that was just really, really neat.
You mentioned a few minutes ago about the side activities in the game, and of course, when you figure out, of course, the one that springs to mind is forklifting.
Yeah,
forklift racing.
Yeah, it's the forklift. That's kind of what I like about Shenmue. It's like it's like a serious like simulation, but it's also like not at all afraid to be quite silly. I say serious simulation, like it takes the simulation side of it seriously, but like there's so many little silly things, and like a lot of those side activities are quite silly. So like there's a job on the third disc where you are a forklift driver, and it's part of this quest to learn more about the kind of the sailors and the mobsters that are kind of running the port. And part of that is you kind of work your job and you kind of find information on the side. You kind of do that during your lunch breaks. So you're spending like your day like just driving around in a forklift, just picking up crates and delivering them to another warehouse. But it's just really fun. It's really, really cool. And it's the thing that makes you do it in the story, but it's really neat. Yeah, and it kind of like, as kind of like a training exercise, it kind of like every morning you go for a race around the docks and around the port, and it's just really fun. It's really silly. But a lot of the side quests in the game, or the side activities rather, just like I said earlier, they just feel really, really handcrafted. They feel like they're actually part of the world. Like there's a very early on in the game, I think, like as you literally go out the door and just run outside, you find out that there's a kitten that's been orphaned. The black car that Landy was driving ran over this cat and orphaned this kitten, and that's one of like the little activities in the game. It's just looking after this orphaned kitten that's in a box by a shrine, and you can go up to it, you can pet it, you can kind of like feed it milk and feed it bits of fish, and get that from your own fridge at home. You can actually go down the shop and get it if you want to. It's just one of those things that you just kind of do on the background, on the back burner when you want. And there's other things in town, like there's capsule machines is a big part of it, so you can you spend some of your money, you get kind of like allowance each day, you can spend that money on capsule machines and like a massive collections of things that are like in the world, whether it's like forklift trucks or I don't know, just random objects, through to actual like Sega characters like Virtual Fighter stuff, Sonic. So there's that side of things. Probably the coolest thing is the arcade, where it had actual arcade games from Suzuki's past. So you had Space Harrier, you had Hang On, that were fully playable in the game, and it's actually quite like it actually did things that since that kind of like commonplace I think did it first. So you had like online leaderboards, you had a high score that you could upload to the internet through the Dreamcast browser, which I think for the time, again, like maybe on PCs, but on the console I think that was certainly a new thing. It also had the idea of like achievements, where if you got a high score in the game, the arcade owner would give you a capsule, like an exclusive capsule for getting that high score. And that's really neat. It's just like it's just like it just felt like this wasn't just like an emulation of a game. It felt like this is embedded in the world, you know. There's other little things, like you just go down the street and there's a Coke machine, and you just go to the vending machine, order Coke, have a drink, and just get on your way. And it's just there's so many little things you just tinker around with, and again, it just felt like these things were just part of this world that were, but they felt like they weren't just throwaway things. They were just like embedded a part of the world. You can get a lot out of them, and just added to the realism and kind of the sense that this was an actual place, and that was really, really cool.
At the same time, though, like you mentioned the realism of those side activities that and how they fit in the world, but at the same time, like you mentioned, it was kind of goofy, and like does that kind of feel out of place? And this might be the wrong term, but feel out of place in a game where you're basically on a revenge quest, going after the guy who just basically killed your father.
That's a good point. I think that the story side of it is kind of like, I wouldn't say my least favorite, but it's just, I don't know, it's something that it's kind of a means to an end to keep exploring this game and kind of get these activities done, I suppose. Yeah, you're right. It's kind of like weird, like thematically that you're on this revenge quest. I think it kind of helps that Ryu is just like such this, like almost like a robot. He's so determined to avenge his father, and everyone else. It seems like a lot of people around him and the activities around him are quite a bit more jovial and a bit more happy. And I think that works with the kind of the tone of the game. I think the game probably would have been a bit more of a drag if it was just very serious all the time. And I think also to make the kind of the world inviting and make it kind of an interesting game to play, you had to make it kind of light-hearted and interesting, because the story is quite straight-faced. Like there's kind of like some really cool like kung fu scenes where it's just like really kind of high-octane action and people are just flying all over the place, and like it's just like punching people over bars and boxes and stuff, and it's kind of ridiculous. But it is quite like in the actual like scene by scene, it is fairly straight-faced and it is fairly serious. So yeah, it's weird. Like you're right, it's kind of like tonally it shouldn't work, but I think it actually does. I think they balance each other out quite well.
One other aspect that we've not touched upon yet is the passport system.
Yeah, the passport stuff is really. It's I think one of my first like interactions with like gaming on a console, like, online gaming on a console. Even though you couldn't really play online, quote unquote, and it just allowed you to kind of upload your high scores from the arcade. The other arcade games that I forgot to mention, actually, there's a darts game. Where you like the hand kind of like hovers in front of a dartboard and moves around automatically, and you time it when you want it to throw over that specific section. And it's a lot harder than it looks. And I remember spending just hours with Rob, my friend who introduced the game with me, and we would just try and get our high score. And we got, remember, like a 700 and something high score. We uploaded it online, and we were like in the top like 200 in the world, and it was just like such an amazing thing. Like again, like today, you wouldn't even think like bat an eyelid at that sort of functionality, but it was such a really cool thing. And you'd go online also and you'd find out like backstory about more of the game, like the people in the world. You could like get special toy capsules and little things like that. It was kind of like, it wasn't like a big part of the game, but it was like, it added more flavour and more kind of, I don't know, just, yeah, it added a bit more to the arcade side of things and made it a bit more competitive, which was really neat.
So let's touch upon some of the story then. Or rather the characters of that story then. So let's touch upon the main lead of Rio then. How did you find his arc basically?
There isn't really much. I don't know. It's difficult. I don't really think much of the story of Shenmue in general, if I'm honest. Like, I think his arc is basically he finds out like these certain things about the game and he just keeps going onwards. The interesting thing that happens, like you learn more about his father. As part of the story, so like at the start of the game, like Landy kind of kills him, he takes the mirror, and they've had a past relationship, and so there's a point in the game, slight spoilers because it's quite an interesting thing, is that you go back to your home, you go to the dojo, and you can actually find like a secret compartment, and you go downstairs and you find another mirror, and you find like a photo of Landy, and like him and like this other mysterious character, and that you no, I don't think you ever find out who that is. So you find things about these characters. That Ryu as a whole, I don't know, he's a little bit robotic, and he's just a bit of like a plain slate. I think he's just very determined just to keep pressing on. Yeah, and there's a character, Naomi, who I think that's her name.
Nozomi.
Sorry, that's the one. Nozomi, who's like his girlfriend, and he like really looks after him, and it's just quite amusing / quite tragic that like she's really caring for him and really worried about him on this quest, but he just kind of like brushes her off, and it's just like, yeah, I know, yeah, okay. And there's not many like meaningful interactions, I think, that I can remember or really stand out to me between those two characters. So yeah, he's kind of like, he's just a very determined character to kind of just get on with things, and it's I think it felt to me at least like a story where it was driving the lore and this grander story of what like the mirrors in the game and Landy, rather than Ryu himself. And I'm sure maybe like as the game goes on, he kind of develops more as a character, but I just don't remember him really standing out in particular. But just the same, he's very kind of. It doesn't help that also in the English translation. The English voiceover is a little bit wooden, and I don't know if that's just kind of what they were going for originally. But yeah, he's just kind of like a very straight and narrow character, I'd say.
We mentioned Nozomi there, where like she is kind of this kind of love interest for Ryu, as you say. How did you find her?
She was fine. She was a character that you don't really interact with much. There's a few like you can have like a few like she's in a certain few cutscenes. There's a few conversations, but you don't really interact with her that often. I think the one thing, the one meaningful interaction is that she actually gets kidnapped towards the end of the game by the Mad Angels, and then you kind of rescue her back. A cool kind of badass motorcycle sequence. So she's like an unfortunate, just like I don't know, female in a game that just kind of gets rescued by the lead character. So that's kind of like where she stands, and you can kind of like chat to her at any time. That she's outside her grandmother's shop, and you can have a conversation. But there's not really much to her, unfortunately. You can have like conversations on the phone, and I think you can kind of like just learn more about a character. But again, it's just one of those things that I don't really just remember much about her. I think Ryu again is just so preoccupied on this task in hand that you can sort of say. I suppose one of the good things about the story is that you really get a sense that Ryu just isn't sure about like the relationship and what to do with it, because I think like it's just like I'm so one-minded on this thing that unfortunately Naomi is like really really worried about him, but just doesn't particularly just get a look in, unfortunately, and just it's just a bit of a shame, really. But there's certainly more. I don't know. There's more interesting characters in Shenmue 2. I think Shenmue 2 does push that a bit more in some interesting ways.
And we'll touch upon Shenmue 2 in a second, but yeah, there is another character we do want to touch upon here, and that is of course Landy. How do you find him as a villain then?
I think he's a good villain in that he's suitably elusive. Like you actually don't encounter him. The first time you actually see him is towards the end of Shenmue 2 in the flesh. So he's quite a good character in the sense that, as in a detective game, you kind of hear these things about him. Not a lot like specifics, but you just kind of like he's just like this evil person who knew your father in some capacity. That is obviously, just so who's come all the way to your literally your backyard in kind of like this little sleepy village and sleepy town. And just that just did this thing and just then gone back to where he's from and stole this mirror, and it's like what you do kind of are interested to see what motivated him to do that. And I think that's one of the bigger things about the Shenmue saga as a whole. It's like kind of why did this happen? What motivated him in particular? And you don't really get a sense of that. You only see him very briefly on the rooftop in Shenmue 2, but it's such a brief thing. So yeah, it's one of those things that I kind of think you don't really know much about him. But as a villain, that's kind of like hyped up as in this detective story of like you just hear things about him, or you kind of know he's this big figure at the end of like a massive massive like chain of command or whatever. You kind of get a sense of that, but you don't really know who he is, and that's again, I think that kind of adds to the character maybe.
What about the world of Shenmue? Like the main world of that game is Yokozuka, which was kind of going through a changing culture, like for a Japanese oriented town, but it also had it felt like there was American pop culture bleeding into it as well. It's
a weird one. It's a game. I love the setting of Shenmue, not because it's necessarily a Japanese setting. It's not because of where it is set. It's because the way it actually realizes the sense of place of what the actual of a neighborhood and like a community. So it's kind of hard to articulate. So I think why I really like Shenmue is that, along with the time stuff, what you do in the game is that you wake up in your house every day, you hit the alarm clock, you collect your pocket money, and you continue on your quest, right? And you're walking past the same kind of streets and the same houses and the shop, and then when you finish your day, you go back to your house and you do that again. And not many games do that, and I think what it does is it reinforces the sense that this is your home and this is your neighborhood, and I find that's really interesting. And it's not like a massive slave to that ideal. There's fast travel in the game, so you can fast forward to the start of a district. There's certain points ahead, you kind of you wake up when you were doing the forklift job, for example. You don't have to get a bus or anything like that. It's just literally you get straight to the job. But it earths the game in a few of us that I've kind of played. That you're just in this neighborhood, and you just every day you're kind of going through it. And it gives you this sense of attachment. And I think the ending of the game actually that makes it kind of more powerful, because this is a place that you've kind of grown to like really kind of enjoy exploring and just be a part of, and it's weird just going on this ship and leaving the country. It's kind of strange. And I think that's kind of what, combined with the whole time aspect of like kind of forcing you to go back home. I think the actual like location and setting is just like really, really interesting. I think actually like Shenmue 2, again, we'll talk about this in a sec, but like I think Shenmue 2 just, it's like a sense of like Hong Kong better than this, but it just feels like, in terms of like what this particular town in Japan, I don't know, I never got a sense that this was like somewhere I felt like it was a strong realization of that. It just felt like this could have been any Japanese neighborhood. This could have been like any Japanese town, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just like that, having that kind of like sense of like atmosphere in terms of this is a neighborhood that you could feel like you can have a connection to. I thought was incredibly well done. Just less so the actual like this is a realization of a specific time and a specific place.
So it's safe to say that Shenmue 1 is perhaps the defining game for the Dreamcast, right?
I'd definitely say so. I think it's, in terms of like what it did for the Dreamcast, in terms of like I don't know, just the budget side of things, and like and it's just like a big tentpole release. And I think it encapsulates about what a lot of the Dreamcast was trying to do. Like it was a super ambitious machine ahead of its time, and I think Shenmue was that as well. Like it's done a lot of things that other games have done since. But I think still Shenmue is very much a game that still captures. It still does things that no other game has done in my eyes.
If Shenmue 1 is the defining game of the Dreamcast, like, would you say Shenmue 2 is the last great Sega game? Because like I mentioned Alan Williamson's episode at near the top of the show, and he more or less said it was the last great Sega game when he was on about Shenmue 2 as one of his honourable mentions. He has a bit of a personal tale with Shenmue 2, which I advise everyone to go and listen to with his episode. But just to go back to the question, is Shenmue 2 the last great Sega game?
Possibly. I think. I mean, it's definitely the last game I remember really paying attention to on a Sega console. Like I can't think of really anything other since. Like ever since then, I remember it quite vividly when Sega gave up on the Dreamcast, and like reading in like Games Magazine, just like going to my local game station, I think it was at the time, and like seeing and just hearing about like, oh, Crazy Taxi is coming to the GameCube, or this that or the other games come to like a PS2, and it's just a really weird thing where it's suddenly original games from Sega like started slowing down, and then you just see the games that they had made and the franchises they had made come to other platforms. I think it might be actually one other game that I think, I'm trying to think that in the timeline, but Super Monkey Ball, the original Super Monkey Ball, is an incredible game. I don't know how that fits compared to like the time frame, but that could be the last great Sega game, just because it's such an incredible like just GameCube launch title. Just a really great feel to it, like great sort of sense of speed, and such a great game just to pick up and play. It was just like a beautifully presented, like the sounds of it were great, the visual style. I'm just really bummed out they don't make Super Monkey Ball games. And if they do make them, it's just some weird kind of like mobile spin-off that doesn't really have anything to do with Super Monkey Ball anymore. So that might be like the last great Sega game, but like Shenmue 2 was kind of like the Dreamcast's last hurrah, that's for sure. I remember like getting it very, very late in the kind of Dreamcast life cycle, if not maybe when it was cancelled. I can't remember how those two things sync up.
You mentioned how Shenmue 2 had better characters over 1. Like explain what you mean by that in more context.
I felt like you interact more with the characters in there. So I'm trying to remember the names. So there's one called Ren, which I remember that because obviously Crazy Ren, my nickname. And he's kind of like he becomes kind of like you kind of meet him halfway through Shenmue 2, and he's kind of like you're kind of like I don't know, how you best to describe him. It's a kind of like it almost sounds like a buddy cop thing where he's just like it's kind of your sidekick, and you're just as you're kind of getting kind of closer and closer to this mob, and like Landy's kind of like Hong Kong's associates. It's just very much like he's there with you, kind of kicking ass as well. And there's also another character called Joy who you meet in the start of the game. I think what's it called, Aberdeen. I think it's the starting area, and she's riding a motorcycle, and she kind of shows you around. She gets you your first job, and I don't know. You just feel that these characters have got more like spark and personality to them than what they were in like to any other character in the first game.
And I believe you mentioned as well, like Hong Kong, like how there's more to explore there. Like again, explain yourself.
Explain myself. I think Shenmue 2. I think what's really interesting about Shenmue 2 is that it's a very different game to the first game. As we were kind of discussing earlier, like Shenmue, I think it's got such a great sense of place. Like you'll feel like you really are part of like this kind of like this community, this neighborhood, right? That you feel like you've grown up there. Like as Ryu was growing up there, you kind of get a sense that you kind of get kind of familiar with it as well, and it's quite sad to leave, and you kind of get to know the people around there. Whereas in Shenmue 2, you're just plunged into this place that's so hectic, so completely different to the first game. Even though like mechanically, like the game is quite similar, like it plays the same and like it has a lot of the same things. Just even that like shift in setting just makes it just feel it works because of that, right? It's just like this thing that's like, oh god, this is like there's so many more people around. Like if you play it on the Dreamcast, like it just chugs quite a bit in certain spaces. Like there's quite a lot of like people popping in on the screen. You just get the sense that you're just like a stranger in a strange place. And I think even though I think I prefer Shenmue 1 because it's like a more sense of like I don't know place. Shenmue 2 just it's also that's a strength to that because it just feels like you're just being plunged into this really hectic, busy city where it's just so like just busy. There's one area in the game, what's it called? In Shenmue 2, Kowloon, which is the kind of which is like a walled city, which I think has been mostly demolished now. In Hong Kong, but you get to visit that, and it's like kind of like a stronghold for like some of the kind of the sort of the end game stuff, and it's just this incredibly like atmospheric place where there's just tall buildings, like this slum areas, and it's just really like a really incredible atmosphere, and I think like I got the sense that like this is probably what Hong Kong was like between that area and other areas in the game, more than what Japan, like the specific place. Is it Yokoshima? I'm terrible at the sorts of thing the original Shenmue was saying. I got a sense like that probably mirrors Hong Kong better than the first game did that area. I think that was just I think again like Shenmue 2 just feels like it captures that specific place and that specific time period like a lot better than the first game did.
And well, of course, when you're talking about Shenmue 2, you have to mention the cliffhanger as well. Perhaps the biggest cliffhanger in all of games that it probably isn't Half-Life 2 Episode 2 or Halo 2, although to be fair we got the resolution to Halo 2 anyway, so that cliffhanger, it's well I'm trying to think of the right term to describe it, but it's iconic, basically. That's the right term, perhaps.
Yeah, it's very kind of left field. I think what the game does really well, like it's the ending of that game as a whole is really like interesting. So basically, what happens is that you finish the Kowloon section, you see Landy. The story kind of like it's wrapped up for that game, kind of like quite neatly, and it could have been left there fine. But then you turn out like and I think I remember this like when in the actual game case. So there's 3 discs for the game, and I think there's a 4th disc called like a data disc or something like that, and it's basically meant to be extra stuff. So you're not meant to know, or at least the way I perceived it, that this wasn't like anything on here to do with the game. But it says put in this disc once you're done, so you put it in, and then you're playing like a new area of the game, and this area is so completely different to anything else you've seen so far. Like granted, like Shenmue 1 was like kind of like a small neighborhood, like a town and a port area. Shenmue 2 was like a really busy, like bustling Hong Kong, but the actual like the end kind of area is I don't know, it's like Gaolin Forest or something like that. It's like a beautiful forest area where you're doing this trek with this new character called Shenhua, who's kind of like hinted at the very very first game. It's a character that you finally meet, and it starts to delve into some of the more kind of mystical elements of the game. You kind of find out like you start to learn a little bit more about the mirrors. You learn what Shenmue actually is, and Shenmue is a tree, in like a specific tree that seems to kind of tie into like the kind of the lore of the game and the mirrors, and you just go on this trek, and it's just like you're just kind of going over these little brooks, and you like sitting in a cave, and it's just like from going like these really bustling metropolitan areas to this wilderness is just really a crazy shift. And it's great, and it's so unexpected as well. Like it just kind of like it just kind of I don't know, leaves you breathless. It's a really really neat twist. At the very end, I can't remember the specifics, but I think it's to do with like a sword in the mirror, and like they kind of hover into the air. And as for a game that's kind of like a simulation, and it's kind of like grounded like in realism using like time and like activities that are kind of like things you do to kill time. It's just like it's very jarring, and it's like how can this game go back from this? Like how does it explain it? Like is there a reason? Is it become like a weird fantasy game? It's just a weird ending, but it just makes you want to like see Shenmue 3, because it's like, are we going to see more cool areas like this? Are we going to see this mystical kind of side to it? What happens next? And yeah, it's such a crazy cliffhanger. Like the whole last section is just like such a weird turn, but it's so great. It's just a shame we kind of haven't seen anything since, really.
Which leads into the hypothetical Shenmue 3 then. Which I have been mocking and teasing everyone on for the past few years. So yeah, the game has been at numerous points over the last few years, like certainly since 2005, so for nearly 10 years, like Shenmue 3 has been speculated about on and off and on and off, and then finally in 2011 we get our resolution when Ryo and Landy fight on the moon and Cliff Blazinski is just there fighting alongside. No, I'm referring to the Mega 64 video, of course, for anybody who doesn't know.
That's probably what's going to happen. That's what I essentially read from Yu Suzuki's post-mortem. It's like, yeah, that's Cliff Blazinski in the game. He's like, Landy isn't the real villain. It's him. It's Cliffy B.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And he meets Tony Soprano and he races forklifts.
I'd love to, Shenmue 4. That'd be great if that happened.
No, in all seriousness, Shenmue 3, like Suzuki has mentioned in the past, it's obvious that he wants to make this game, but like Sega is more or less not interested in making it unless a first-party platformer in terms of Sony and Microsoft plumb up the cash to, say, alright, we'll do it as long as you're paying for it. It's basically the Bayonetta 2 situation, which Nintendo stumped up for money for Bayonetta 2.
Yeah, I think that's probably how it's gonna happen. I've been kind of like, when I go to like E3 press conferences, I've been kind of like very interested to kind of, because you sometimes get like on Twitter like some like teasers and stuff like that, like some rumors and stuff going around, and like I don't know, you get the sense that that sort of thing could happen, that someone is just silly enough to be like, right, Shenmue 3 needs to happen. But it's weird. It's such a niche game. Like, I know it's like a big thing people joke about, and it's kind of like this this thing that people want to see a sequel from, but not many people, I think, like relatively have like played it, just because again it's like a Dreamcast only game, and it's quite hard to get hold of these days. So it's one of those things where, like, yes, it has like a lot of reverence and a lot of kind of respect almost, but who's going to play it? So I can sort of see why it hasn't come back. I think what I'd like to see, and I think if Shenmue 3 was going to happen, this is probably the only way it would happen, is that we'd need to see like a HD remake of the first two games. And when I say remake, I mean like a remaster.
Oh yeah, I was just about to bring those up as well. But yeah,
I don't think like you could feasibly like remake the first two games like in a similar style, and it wouldn't be as, again, like games like today aren't dramatically different from Shenmue. I think the way it kind of implements like time and place and stuff like that and the activities is quite unique. But in terms of the actual scale of it, even though it's quite handcrafted and there's a lot of areas in the game that are just kind of like, you don't have to go there, you don't have to go, like there's some shops and stuff you'd probably never, even if you go down a certain path of line of questioning, you never ever see. So there's quite a lot of extra stuff to the game that isn't vital, but I think is also quite important to the overall atmosphere. You probably could drop some of that, but it wouldn't be a Shenmue game. You could basically, you could recreate Shenmue today and it probably wouldn't be crazy expensive. But I don't know, what I'd like to see is basically the same Shenmue 1 and 2 remastered, and then I don't know if it would be possible or how easy it would be, difficult it would be, but then make Shenmue 3 in a very similar style, like the same kind of engine, the same kind of asset kind of quality, and just kind of realise that game. Like, you don't need to make like a modern day Shenmue game, because that would be crazy expensive. It probably won't even be the same game. Like they'll probably listen to people like, oh, they didn't like the time aspect, so we're just going to allow you to fast travel. Which Shenmue 2 actually should add. Shenmue 2 did add that, and I think it did lose to a certain respect some of the kind of like the sense of like, well, killing time and forcing players to go around. So yeah, like if they remade Shenmue, would they kind of concede those parts of it and make it less special a result? Possibly, I don't know. But yeah, it's just I don't know. Like I'm surprised, like because Sega has gone into their back catalogue and re-released their old games, like a lot of Dreamcast games especially. So I'm kind of surprised that Shenmue hasn't come back.
There was a report a few years ago that both 1 and 2 were ready to go in terms of remastered editions.
Yeah, and I don't know why it hasn't necessarily happened. I don't know if Yu Suzuki has to have like a final sign off, but I know that Yu Suzuki I think needs Sega's permission. I think otherwise everybody would have Shenmue for you by now. So I don't know where that kind of breaks down really. I don't know what is happening there, and I don't know how because obviously Sega has recently. There's reports that it's basically kind of changing its business model to being more PC and mobile orientated, and less kind of console focused. And I don't know what that really means for Shenmue. I don't know if that's a bad thing because obviously Shenmue is a console game and that sort of game isn't going to do well for them, or if that's good because maybe they care less about going after something like this and maybe they'll let someone else do it if they want to. Maybe they're a bit more less precious with the IP. So I don't know. It's really hard to say. I would love to see Shenmue 3, but I'm just also very worried about what it would be. I'd really want it to come out with the same kind of approach and the same ambition and kind of attention to detail that the first two games had that made them particularly unique.
Suzuki did mention I think it was last year. Yes, it was last year. That he might look into possibly kickstarting the game. So, would that be possible? Like, obviously, like you said, Sega, he would have to go to Sega for permission first. But assuming that everything checks out, like, do you think a Kickstarter would be good for Shenmue 3? Or
I don't know. Again, because it's one of those games where it's got such a dedicated fan base, but it might be such a vocal minority. That would it be enough? Like, is there enough people that really care about Shenmue to actually bring it back? I don't know. Like, crowdfunding could be an option, but I just don't know if it's got the support. I think the way it's probably best to come back is through a publisher, through a first party, whoever it is who would be interested in maybe kind of like reviving the whole brand and then going after the third one. I think that's probably the way I'd probably want to see it. It's just kind of weird. And also, like, would a Kickstarter, would that mean, like, with crowdfunding, would that mean certain concessions? I don't know. It's difficult, really. It'd be whatever happened. Like, if it happened, I think a third Shenmue, in some way, whether it's some weird kind of transmedia project or like a comic series or I don't know, an actual game. I think it probably will happen one day. I just no idea what it is, and it's weirder as time goes on. We're getting away from what Shenmue's getting older as time goes on. Like, can you go back to like the same way like Wasteland? Well, then you look at things like Wasteland and Pillars of Eternity. These are based on like very specific RPGs from a very specific era, and they've come back, and it looks like those games are great versions of those games. Like if they were like direct sequels, from that era. So maybe that can happen. Maybe if you have an author like Yu Suzuki, he knows exactly what he's doing, and I think from the very start of Shenmue, he knows what he wanted from this series and what kind of like where the story was going. And I think if you made it, I think he said, I don't know if he said comments like that or said comments previously, but he's like said like he knows exactly what Shenmue 3 is. He knows what he's doing, which is kind of reassuring. I just don't know whether like the actual mechanical side of it and the actual gameplay would be different and what that'd have an impact. Because I think, as I was saying earlier, like what I like about Shenmue the most, I think, is the way kind of the time mechanic and the sense of setting works with the story and works with kind of the sense of pacing and things like that. Like mechanically, it's such an interesting game. Would that be lost if you made a third game and you kind of think, well, let's make it modern?
So let's go back to Shenmue 1 then. Talk about the stuff that we've not touched upon tonight that you liked about Shenmue 1.
I don't know. I felt like I've ranted and raved quite a lot about Shenmue. I'm trying to think what else I haven't talked about. So the activities, the kind of, I don't know. There's just, I think it's just such a really crazy ambitious game. Like I just feel like it's a game that just feels like this is a place, and they've kind of like almost like mined it for like just people and just activities to do, and it's just a place you can just roam around in and just it just has a really like special atmosphere to it. And I don't know how much of that is, and something I've been thinking about a lot more is nostalgia. Like, is this because I have such fond memories of this game that it kind of reinforces the sense that this is a good game. So playing it like with extra life actually helped that, because it's like, no, this game is actually really good, and I found out things I didn't know about it that I really appreciate, and all that sort of thing. Yeah, it's just such a really interesting, special game, and I really hope more people play it, because I think it's divisive for the right reasons. Like, it's got some things like if you can get on board with them, it's like it does them in a really interesting way. And there's probably like some examples of games out there that I'm just really like, I don't know, blindsided to, that do a lot of these things that I'm talking about, and it does them well. Like, you look at something like GTA, it's like it does a lot of the side quest stuff, right? It does it in its world. There's loads of like stuff that's really good attention to detail, but I think, I don't know, this way the time mechanic bends into it as well really helps. I hope Shenmue comes back. I just hope people play it. Really, I think it'd be a really fascinating game if it came back. What people would think of it, and would they enjoy it for the same reasons I like it.
What about the things you didn't like about Shenmue?
Oh, good question. I think some of the story stuff is a bit lackluster. I think, as we discussed, I just really don't have much to say about it, just because I don't really. It's just not something I've really much thought into. It's just kind of like a means to an end, I think, for me. The music's incredible. I should say that it's again, like, in terms of the day-night transition, it's really, really cool. The Tomato Convenience Store music is really chirpy and happy and just great. Things I didn't like, the cats in the harbour port section are really annoying. When you're driving a forklift truck, they just get in the way all the time. They'll just drive into them. Like, you'll just come to a sudden stop, then they'll fade out into out of existence, and you can keep going. It just kind of ruins your flow. That's quite annoying. I don't know. I think the flaws of the game, like the time aspect, can be quite annoying. Like, especially if you can just miss you can shade, like, if you do it right, and if you play it know what you're doing, and you know exactly, right, I talked to this person to get this thing. You can chain a lot of quests and get a lot done in the first few days, but if you miss like one of those and you have to wait the next day, it does break the momentum. But you just go to do the side quest stuff and do all that. I think the thing that also, as I mentioned earlier, the fighting side of it just isn't particularly strong. I think people, maybe fighting game aficionados, might disagree with me. I don't really play fighting games, so I don't really have particular reverence towards them. But I just didn't find it particularly engaging. It's, again, like a means to an end. It's like, so it's a nice thing to break up the action and break up the exploration, but it's something I could just give or take. And I think in Shenmue 2 actually there's some really hard fights, and it kind of just slows things down, I think, and it's just like, come on, but at the same time I wouldn't take that away from the game. Shenmue is a game that, with its flaws of like how it approaches time and things like that, makes it a stronger game overall. What makes it such a interesting product by the end of it.
So we don't need to kind of rank your favourite Shenmue games, because there's only been 2, so we don't need to go over that. But what I will ask is, what is the legacy of Shenmue going forward? Because like it's already made some influence, or not some influence, definitely some significant influence in terms of QTEs. Obviously, I mentioned kind of half flippingly, but it's also kind of half truth in there as well, in that the QTEs have really influenced a lot of modern games, especially Quantic Dream stuff, anyways, and not to mention like internally as well at Sega, because like there is an essence of Shenmue within the Yakuza series as well. So yeah, what is the legacy of Shenmue, do you think?
I think it's like, you're right. I think the main thing, like, just in terms of like an innovation, is like, the QTE is a huge one that games have used ever since, and some games use it well, some games use it don't, and it's a thing that it brought out. In terms of legacy, it's weird. I don't actually, even as much as I love Shenmue, I've never played the Yakuza series, and I think part of it is because of that comparison. It's just like, it doesn't look like Shenmue. Like, it looks like a kind of similar game in its component parts, but like, I like Shenmue because of its atmosphere and its sense of like place and setting. So yeah, I think it's had, but then again, like, the Yakuza games like have their fan favorite, audiences, but they're not sort of huge games. And I think another game that's got similar comparisons is Watch Dogs. Not Watch Dogs, sorry. Sleeping Dogs.
Ah.
Sorry, all dog games kind of blurred together in my head. But yeah, that apparently is very kind of Shenmue-esque because that's set in Hong Kong and that's kind of like side activities and it's kind of an open world. But again, it just looks like an open world game that's just like a big, open, expansive GTA style world. That's something I'm not interested in. So yeah, I think people compare stuff to Shenmue, but not. It's actually the game I say that I have played that really reminded me a lot of Shenmue is L.A. Noire.
Yeah, I did have to think about L.A. Noire in terms. You mentioned how Shenmue felt more like a detective game, and the first game that popped in my mind when you said that was actually L.A. Noire.
Yeah, and it's not in like it's weird because like the detective part of Shenmue is very much you're talking to people in the street, and you don't really do that in L.A. Noire. But I think L.A. Noire had like a really good sense of atmosphere, and it felt like as you go into apartments and stuff, it felt like this is a really handcrafted place. Something that Shenmue does that's quite amusing, I think, is that when you pick up objects, the way it just very like a janky way of the way you inspect them, like you kind of move them around with the analog stick, and it just kind of like he just moves his hand up and down and around to the side, and it just looks really weird. It's like very kind of janky, like I don't know, just very strange hand movement. And I think L.A. Noire has a very similar. That like, I remember playing that like this is like very Shenmue-esque. Also, like L.A. Noire has like chase scenes, and those feel very similar to Shenmue. So yeah, like those things combined, it's like this is kind of like I do wonder. I'd be very interested to chat to the I don't know, just to hear from, and I've been meaning to look into it for a while. Like, were they influenced by Shenmue? Because there's a lot of it. It's like this is quite similar. This feels like it's kind of cut from the same cloth in a way. It's like that maybe you guys enjoyed that game, and you've put it in like a more expansive open world in a GTA like setting. But when you're kind of like in these missions and you're kind of like zoomed in on these particular parts, it feels quite Shenmue-esque, which is interesting. So and I think like when you look at Legacy, like I think just open worlds in general probably owe a lot to Shenmue. I'm just trying to think in terms of what games like where like obviously GTA 3 is the big one.
Oh yeah.
GTA in general is like the defining open world game, but yeah, I think like Shenmue was one of the first games, at least I recognised on a console. At least it was like this is like a game where you are free to do what you want, and you're kind of just free to explore. And that was kind of like a bit of a revolution in my eyes. It was just really a really neat thing just to be in this place and explore it as you want and interact with things as you please, and that's kind of neat. So imagine I don't know if that had a knock-on effect. Again, it's difficult to say because it was a game on a platform that had a fairly small audience. And I don't know how many people played it ultimately. It was obviously a popular game, people remember it fondly, but how big was it ultimately, Well,
we'll never know, I guess.
Maybe I don't think Shenmue could be a big thing. Yeah, if it came back, would people be interested? I don't know. It'd be, it's weird.
Honorable mentions. Let's do it.
Okay, honorable mentions. I think Final Fantasy VII is a huge game that I think it was like the first game. So I grew up on like a diet of like platformers, and that's what I really really enjoyed playing as a kid. And then to come to like a game like Final Fantasy VII, that was just so huge and just had like a huge fleshed out story with interesting characters and had plot twists, and it's just I remember vividly like when you're going through Midgar and you're kind of coming to the end of that section, and I remember just thinking like this is the end of disc 1, like this is quite a long game, and how much more of this is, because this is huge, and then you suddenly go out into the open, like the big world map, and it was just mind blowing. Like this is this whole world here, and it just keeps going, and disc 1 like is a long way off from there, and it's just a huge game that I'd never really kind of just had played before, and it was just really something else, and it's not my favourite Final Fantasy VII game. No, it's my favourite Final Fantasy game, but it's not the best one. I think 9 is the best, but 7 holds such a special place because I think like so many others, it's my first JRPG, and it was my first like taste of that genre, and it was just absolutely mind blowing, absolutely incredible. And actually, I loved it so much. What happened was, I accidentally deleted my save before the last boss, so I played all the way to the end, hadn't finished it, and accidentally deleted my save. Basically, my brother wanted to play it, I think, and I got into like this muscle memory of like you just like you press X to select your save, press up to override X, and you just because you obviously over 60 hours, whatever the game was, you just do it automatically. I just did it without thinking at the first save point on my brother's playthrough, and I just froze, and it was just like, oh god. And that taught me a very special lesson. It's like have multiple saves, back up your saves. I learned that the hard way. That day on, I used multiple saves, and obviously that's what you're meant to do in an RPG. And I just, but the thing is, like I was quite upset over it. I was like, oh god, I've just wasted all that time. But then I just later that evening, I just started the new game, kept playing, and I just don't remember complaining at all. Like, I was happy to play through it all again, and I played it all the way through to completion, just not even blinking an eye almost. I just didn't even like think about it. I loved that game so much, and I enjoyed it that much. Like today, if I don't know, I'm playing like Dark Souls, and there's a 5-minute section, and I die, and I'm really annoyed. I'm like, I've got to redo that all over again, and god damn it, you know. But yeah, it's weird that a game that long and that kind of just that epic for me just to delete the save at the very last minute and happily go back in again is crazy. But I think that just goes to show how much it meant to me. I think that game and how important it was for me. Metal Gear Solid, the original. Again, for similar reasons to Final Fantasy VII, but obviously it's a very different game. It's just a game that with a really fleshed out story and great characters and like cool plot twists, and it was incredibly cinematic and this great kind of like sci-fi espionage tale, and it had like that side of it, and it also had like it was just such a fun game to play. Like there's so many little things you can tinker with. Like, there's so many like item combinations and ways to play with guards and little like just fourth wall breaking stuff. You know, the whole Psycho Mantis where like the controller changing the ports and like the back of the box stuff. It was just incredible that it just played so well. And like I think stealth games, that was like the early Metal Gear games. I think up till definitely the first and second game, maybe the third. But like when stealth games were simple, like it was very much just like a vision code. That's when I enjoyed them the most. Like it felt like the rules here are absolute. If I get spotted and if I am in this vision cone, then that's what happened, right? Like you play some stealth games today, and it's just like it's so difficult to actually know where I'm going wrong. But like the Metal Gear Solid games, in terms of a gameplay perspective, like nailed it. It was like a very simple rule set, and it just allowed you to express yourself more easily, and like you were confident in what you were doing. You know, at the same time, like there was that sense of confidence. But I think the first Metal Gear game, with its restricted camera angles, like it was very overhead, and you couldn't move the camera with the right stick, gave it a sense of like you were kind of like on the back foot. You constantly were trying to like, you know, the enemies also always kind of had the jump on you almost. Like you had a map to look at, and you know you could kind of look around corners, but you never quite knew what was around the kind of like further down the line. So the way it approached like camera angles in that game is really great, and yeah, it's just really like that first game is particularly special, and I love the second one as well. The third less so, and I know you hate me for saying that. I know that's not what you want to hear. Is that?
And that's it for this episode of My Favorite Game. See you next time. Bye bye.
Yeah, Metal Gear Solid. I that's it. It's a great game, but it's not my favorite Metal Gear game for sure.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Another game, if you want more, is Sonic 2. We talked about it a bunch earlier, but yeah, it's just I was Sonic obsessed. I love platform games, and it's just I'll go back to it now. I just think it's the pinnacle. I think Sonic 1 is a bit too like slow, and Sonic 3 and Knuckles. I don't know. I felt the level design is just a bit more harsh. Like things would come out like you'd just run really quick, and things would just throw up, and like you'd just get attacked out of nowhere. I think also Sonic 2 like has the best pacing of any other Sonic game. Like it has 2 levels per act. The world themes are actually quite inventive, like compared to games like Mario or even like Sonic 3, where you had like lava and ice and desert, like very specific like themes that everyone used. Those had like a jungle that had a chemical plant, a giant casino, caves. It was just a lot more. I don't know, a bit more inventive than what most platform games had at the time. I think it's also just a bit more bite sized. Like I think like Sonic, you can go back and play Sonic 2 in like an hour or something, and like you have a really kind of like well-rounded experience. Like just great bosses, great music. Whereas, because I listened to Alan's podcast on Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and there's a game that made me think like, yeah, actually Sonic 3 and Knuckles is actually like, you know, was actually better than I probably give it credit for. And I can certainly like the way he explains it, the way like I can certainly understand where he's coming from, and it's certainly a more epic game. But I think Sonic 2. So it's been talking about Shenmue evening. Yeah, Sonic 2. I think it's just a much better, well-paced game. I think, and just plays better. That's what I think. Super Metroid,
Okay.
I think, is. So this was a game. I got my SNES, and it was like, right, I've got Mario, and I've got Star Fox. These are my games. And I also had this other game called Super Metroid. I'd never heard of it before, and it's just like, well, what is that? I just did play it for like a month or something. But you play it, and it just blew me away. It was like my first Metroidvania style game. And as someone who just grew up on platformers and just really loving platformers like Sonic and just all sorts of stuff on the Amiga, it was just like it was weird to play a game that just wasn't literally like a left to right platformer. It was like this intricate set of pathways where you just had to like explore, and you just kind of like had to find nooks and crannies, and you had to go back, use different items in different places, and you upgrade your character, and it was just a really like incredible game. It was just like such a just like a mind opening thing. Like, wow, this is crazy. It also came with a guidebook. My copy did. It was like in a big box, like a big kind of A4 guidebook, and I think actually like that confused me more than anything, because I read it like linearly. Like I like each area is obviously in like a section by section. So I was expecting like that's how the game played, right? You do this area, then you go to the next area. So for a long time it just bugged me up, because I was just expecting it to be like, well, the next area, like I can't go anywhere here. So what am I doing? So there's like a really like interesting rewiring of how I approached games like that. And once I got the hang of it, it's just actually incredible. It just got such like few other games have got an atmosphere like Super Metroid had. Like it's just so, it conveys so much with like what is, you know, a fairly kind of like, I don't know, like a 16-bit game. It's just incredible. I played it fairly recently, and I felt like the combat doesn't hold up as well. Like I think the enemies are quite annoying, and it's just quite hard to shoot stuff generally. But I think like just in terms of atmosphere, like I think I learned that atmosphere is a thing that I really enjoy about games, and yeah, like that game just absolutely, it's just drenched in atmosphere. It's really good. And it's just really scary as well. Like it's a game that there's certain areas where like I just felt quite scared. Like exploring, and it's just like really like just makes you feel nervous. And yeah, it's such a great game. Yeah, and I think ever since I've loved Metroidvanias, and I love games of atmosphere, probably because of that game.
If I put you on the spot, top 3 games ever, what would they be? Shenmue at the top, obviously.
Well, geez. Well, my favourite games. I'd say Shenmue, Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy 7. Again, they're my favourites. I don't think they're necessarily the best games. But
yeah.
That's probably that's my favourites. And then probably Super Metroid, then maybe Sonic 2. And there's probably some really obvious ones that I'm forgetting that I'd probably kick myself later, but that's probably where I'd land on those. So yeah, like Shenmue, Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy 7. I'm the gaming editor at Digital Spy, which is kind of like a mainstream website for like various bits of entertainment, and I look after the game stuff. Personally, you can follow me on Twitter. That's where I basically mainly go to post my random sort of thoughts and just like any work related stuff and any personal related stuff. So that's Crazy Ren, which is Crazy REYN, all one word. CrazyRen.com is my website. It's basically just a landing page to like links of stuff I've done and kind of like here's who I am basically, and that's basically me in a nutshell, I think.
Thanks for listening to My Favourite Game. Next week, Molly Carroll on The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Until next week, bye bye.